Before we get started for the next session, just to remind everybody, that if you're online, please go ahead and log into sli.do, sli.do, to ask your questions. When you're there, you're prompted for an event code, ACHA-PGM2. That allows you to go ahead and enter your questions. So thank you so much to our live audience. I think at the moment we're well over 300 institutions online, so thank you so much for joining us. Our next session is Building Accessible and Desirable Food Solutions That Work. A very exciting panel. It's my pleasure to introduce Edith Cooke, who's the Associate Director for Administrative Services with the Student Health Center at American University, and is also a regional representative to the ACHA Board of Directors, who will be serving as your moderator today. Welcome.
Thanks, Devin. Over the past several years, the issue of hunger on campus has come to the forefront, leading to a variety of issues, policy concerns, campus solutions, and a torrent of student engagement. Campus food pantries have cropped up across the country to help mitigate the issues, but long-term solutions are still an area of concern for our universities. The goal of our panel is to discuss hunger on college campuses and how the nation's education system can address these issues and help students find solutions. Joining us today are Maisie Ganzler, the Chief Strategy and Brand Officer at Bon Appétit. Ms. Ganzler joined Bon Appétit in 1994, and she has been instrumental in shaping the overall strategic direction and overseeing the company's culinary development, purchasing efforts, nutrition and wellness, and marketing and communications initiatives. She has developed programs including the Farm to Fork and Eat Local Challenge, and is currently working on antibiotics in agriculture, slavery in the seafood supply chain, and on farm workers' rights. Effie Craven is the Legislative Content and Partnerships Manager at Feeding America. Ms. Craven joined Feeding America in the past year and has worked extensively on the 2018 Farm Bill while developing legislative engagement resources for a nationwide network of 200 food banks. Previously, she was the State Advocacy and Public Policy Director at the Regional Food Bank of Oklahoma and the Community Food Bank of Eastern Oklahoma. She directed the federal and state legislative advocacy as well as clinical and university research partnerships. Dr. Tim Miller is the Vice President for Student Affairs at James Madison University. Dr. Miller recently arrived at James Madison coming from George Washington University, where he was the Associate Dean of Students and oversaw the creation of GW's Center for Student Engagement. And finally, we have Kenneth Holmes, Vice President for Student Affairs at Howard University. In his position, Mr. Holmes works closely with a variety of student life developments at Howard, including housing, community engagement, student health and recreational activities. Kenneth works extensively with organizations such as the Professional Employees Council Executive Board and the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, Crime Victims Assistance Center, and the Campus Community Coalition. Because we're seeking the most robust discussion on the topic possible, if anybody in the audience has questions at the end, we'll probably have time for those. And if you're online, please also submit your questions like Devin said. So I'd like to begin, I think, by asking both Ken and Tim, what is this kind of the state of hunger on college campuses as you see it?
Well, first, thank you all for having this panel on this important topic. We've seen a great deal of research. Sarah Goldrick-Rabb and her team with Claire Cady and others have really awakened the knowledge on this issue. And I think that what we've learned is this is not a new issue, it's just our knowledge of it is new. And when you look across the country, they've started more and more research studies to find out what's going on in college campuses. I know, for example, when I was here at George Washington, we took some of the questions they asked and basically boiled down to one question and asked our students how often they went without enough to eat because of a lack of resources for food, and found that, you know, we were pretty much in line with the national numbers, and those national numbers can climb up in the 40 percentile. So you're looking at a lot of students who don't have enough to eat on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And that has to be thought of as a health issue. You know, the most basic needs of our students, to be able to focus, you have to not be wondering when your next meal is going to happen. We also learned from some of our first generation students, which is a population that has hit even more on this issue. Many of them had a strategy for hunger, which was sleep. When they were hungry, they went to bed. And when they should have been studying or should have had an opportunity to go to a club or things like that, they slept because they knew they could only afford 1 or 2 meals a day. So we see this in a very acute way, and we also see the breadth of it all across the country. This is not a community college issue. This is not a private school issue. This is not a public school issue. This is a college issue. It's a national issue, but it's also an issue in college. Students who really had, you know, lunch programs and things like that, those programs don't exist once you come to college, but yet that's how many of them were able to be successful to get to college in the first place. So it's a thing that we have to focus on, something we have to understand is real. The number of times I bring this up and everyone in the room looks at me like I'm crazy needs to end, and we need to realize that this is a real part of the college experience.
Thank you, Tim. I sort of pointed to Tim because we started last year to build an organized way of dealing with hunger on our campus. When I came to Howard about 2.5 years ago, it was clear to me that we had an issue in that when I met with deans and I met with other administrators on campus, everybody had a pantry. For example, when I met with the school at the School of Medicine, they gave out $25 gift cards. Student Support Services had a small closet where they kept food. The health center, the counseling center, there were a number of areas that did that. As a university, 60% of our students are Pell eligible. Many of them receive full Pell. And when you look at the data, about 57% of students of color are more likely to be hungry. So in the spring of this year, our Allied Health and Nurse Sciences program did a study, and I brought a few of those statistics. 74% of our students said the food that they bought did not last the last month, and they didn't have money to buy more. 34% reported that they often could not afford to eat a balanced meal, especially those living off campus. 57% said they ate less than they felt they should because they, again, didn't have enough money for food. 59% reported they had been hungry and they did not, again, eat because of the lack of money, and 68% reported that they cut the size of their meals or skipped meals because of the lack of money. One of the other things, and it's not just at Howard, but this is my 8th institution, and one of the things I found is that a lot of our low-income first-generation college students, not only are they trying to get through college, working and meeting their needs, so oftentimes they're sending money back home. So even when they get a sizable refund to buy books and do some of those things, they don't, because they're trying to help their families back home, because coming to the university, they did not have enough food.
Great. And for our partners, how do you see that this issue in your line of work?
You know, coming from food banking and working at Feeding America, this is not a surprise to us to hear that college students are struggling with hunger. I think the conversation around college students is a little bit different. There's sort of a joke in America that college students, you know, like live on free pizza and ramen, almost as if it's a rite of passage to be hungry in college. But we know that it's a serious problem, and as they mentioned, the numbers are as high as 50% of students struggle with this at some point. So from our perspective, you know, the numbers are high, but they're not shocking. We work in hunger relief all day, every day, and know that this cuts across all different types of populations.
And at Bon Appetit Management Company, we deal exclusively with private institutions of higher education. And so it was several years ago when this issue was brought to us rather a surprise, because we do have relatively low rates of commuter students, for example, but we're seeing the exact same numbers and that have been quoted here. In addition to the academic deficit that this can create, there's also a social one, where even with solutions of keeping dining halls open, does that create a ghettoized system of who is in the dining hall on Saturday night versus who gets to go out and participate in the social aspects of school? So really hitting those students in multiple places.
Great. And we touched a little bit about this, but how does the changing demographic of college students how are you seeing that contribute to this issue on campuses?
I mean, I would say that is one of the things that we're seeing, is that as we become more open to broader sort of demographics of students and trying to do more with financial aid and adding more students that maybe never had this as an opportunity before, those students come here and the financial aid money doesn't last. I mean, that reality that, you know, a student who, you know, let's say we give them a full ride, last I checked, there's no real full ride in existence. Because books never cost exactly what you think they cost. There's the clicker, that you have to buy for certain classes that's not counted. There's, you want to have pizza one night with friends. There's most basic things that the full ride rarely fully covers. And that is just our reality, that the financial aid can only go so far. So I just think if we want to be open to all students, we have to open to them past the day we admit them. We have to consider this a 4-year commitment to welcome and maintain the support and potentially increase the support during their time here versus just, wow, look how great we are because we admitted such a diverse class. We've got to be committed past the admissions process.
Well, I certainly agree with that. And one of the things we're trying to do at Howard is, I remember a few years ago in our Greek system, I remember our Greek advisor shared with me, VP, we can't grow the system because we'll go beyond our carrying capacity. And that's sort of a question that we're asking ourselves. If we're going to bring students to the university, our goal when we admit every student is that they will graduate. And as Tim mentioned, it's far beyond books and supplies and tuition. All of those are just estimates. And so dealing with this and other issues, when you talk about food insecurities, it's going to be incredibly important for students being successful to graduation.
I'd like to add too, and again, we see this across the board with all populations, not just college students, but when budgets get tight, food is often the only area where there's wiggle room, right? You don't have wiggle room on tuition, you don't have wiggle room on housing or what your car insurance costs or all of those other things we all have to pay for. But food is the one area of most people's budgets where they can cut back a little bit, which is exactly why they have coping strategies, as you mentioned, like sleeping because you're not hungry if you're asleep, or trying to make food stretch longer maybe than it should. So that's one area I think that could be especially relevant to college students, is they're already on limited budgets, and food might be the one place where they actually have space to cut back.
And I would just note, one of the things that we believe in higher education is that essentials are food and books. We're forcing our students to choose between those two essentials. One of the best articles out there on this topic is from the Chronicle, where it talks about students choosing between books and food. Our students are making those choices and deciding, can I be successful if I don't buy the book yet or ever, because I actually need to eat lunch today. So these are not simple choices that we're asking 18 and 19-year-olds to make. These are really big decisions that I would hope we could do more to help them not have to make those types of choices. And then they're sacrificing not only their own health, but also potentially their education.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to add another demographic that we haven't talked about is international students that have a very far distance to travel on breaks and aren't able to often make those trips, and then what do they do?
I know we've talked about food pantries a little bit, but what are other ways campuses can help sort of with this problem?
I have to go to some of the previous institutions I've been a part of. I was at the City University of New York at John Jay, and one of the things we did there was we partnered with the Robin Hood Foundation. And if you don't know, the Robin Hood Foundation, they're an organization in New York City that battles poverty and other ills that people deal with. And one of the things they helped us do was we developed a system in our wellness center where students could go and actually apply for benefits, social services benefits, SNAP benefits, and the like. And so they didn't have to go downtown. They actually could do those things on campus. Another thing we did there as well was we had what was called the Gold Coin program, where we worked with our food service vendor. And so we had these gold coins, and we would put them in the wellness center. We'd have them in my office. At the time, I was dean of students, and in other areas. And so when you were talking with a student and they didn't have a meal, you could give them this coin. And we had agreed that whatever the student ordered for food, be it large or small, it was just $5. And so when students presented that coin, it was discreet, and they could get food that way.
I worked on this quite a bit in my past job as a policy director in Oklahoma, as we partnered with universities in Oklahoma to implement pantries as well as other solutions. And one of the things that we are seeing across the country and that Feeding America is a big proponent of is food insecurity screenings as part of a regular healthcare screening. The catch, though, is that if food insecurity screenings are offered, the provider needs to be prepared to offer resources, right? So whether that's a connection to a local pantry or a SNAP application or a gold coin or whatever other innovative solution they have, you can't screen for it if you're not ready to help with it. The other thing that I want to mention is offering food assistance in the same way that colleges offer financial aid, which I think you sort of touched on. It's important to note that financial aid in the college system is not stigmatizing, but food assistance is, right? So if you can pair those together and make it more of a holistic package, food and books, it sort of helps the students feel less ashamed of it, as well as helps destigmatize the issue of hunger in general.
And I would note, one of my challenges, having created a food pantry, is that it's the thing that we often start with without understanding the culture of our community and understanding if that's actually what is best for the community. We do it because as universities, we like tangible things, right? We want to grab a thing and say, look what this tangible thing is that we did to solve this problem. We're not solving this problem with food pantries. Again, I mentioned her before, Claire Cady, one of the pillars of this effort, has called food pantries Band-Aids on bullet wounds. And I remember hearing that the first time as someone who founded a food pantry, and I was actually pretty unhappy about her saying that. I'm like, wait, but you're one of the people who tells us how to do this. She said, right, but we can't convince ourselves it's a solution. We're sort of closing some gaps, we're not solving this. So, for example, having just come to James Madison University, where I'm also an alum, when I got there was a food pantry movement starting among staff, and I put the brakes on it because we don't know what our campus needs. And the worst thing you can do is create a food pantry because it's what you know how to do, but maybe it's not what your campus needs the most. A school like JMU has a great dining program, one of the best dining programs in the country. Maybe we should do a swipe away program instead. We've already met with Rachel Sumek and her team with the swipe away program. That might be a better fit there where students can donate swipes. Or I already know there's a lot of food that gets thrown away every day. Maybe we could just gather up all that leftover food. I know we have lots of dining events where there's lots of food that's really good food at the end of those that doesn't necessarily go back to students. We may have a different solution than a food pantry, because having done it, food pantries aren't easy. You know better than I do, but having only done it for a couple of years, but it's not an easy solution, and it's not the solution. So I think we want to be careful on college campuses and figure out what you're doing and why you're doing it and what your need is and how best to address the need versus jumping to the food pantry solution, thinking that will be the thing that will solve our problem.
And just to add on the food pantry comment, Feeding America is the national organization for the nationwide network of 200 food banks. We have 60,000 community partners, and by partners I mean pantries, schools, soup kitchens, churches, all the traditional places you might think of as a food pantry. And I will second that. Food pantries are not the solution to hunger. They're an important gap filler for the student that's hungry today. A food pantry is a great resource, but they're not going to solve the problem long term for that student or that person. And also they are hard and complicated to run. So that often is where people's minds go first, is we'll just start a pantry. But I would encourage colleges and universities who are interested in that to connect with local food banks, connect with local pantries that are already up and running, and see if there's a way you can just direct your students to them or find a way for them to better serve your students. Starting one up from scratch is often a bigger project than people realize that it is, and it's really hard to sustain one as well. So connecting with the folks who are already doing it is often what we would recommend as a place to start.
And we actually wrote a white paper on this topic, which is available on our website at bamco.com, B-A-M-C-O, like Bon Appetit Management Company, /timeline. It's the most recent entry, or if you just searched food insecurity, written by Cheryl Sternman-Rule, who's here in the audience, our national marketing manager, along with assistant professor Tony Jack from Harvard. And much of what you've heard here is also in our white paper. I think that food pantries are one, as you say, of many quivers in your arrow, or whatever that saying should be. But that starting with that needs assessment, really a cross-functional group across the campus, doing the needs assessment, determining what resources you have, what the actual needs are of your student population. Do they change throughout the year? What are your options in terms of like SNAP eligibility? Most of our locations aren't eligible to take SNAP benefits because we don't provide a high enough of our revenue from from grocery, it's from prepared foods. So getting our students registered into a SNAP program wouldn't actually be beneficial, but that might be very different if you have a different type of offering on your campus. So really doing that site-specific needs assessment and then getting the information out to students is really critical. One of the things that I thought was most creative that came through in the white paper is the idea of adding a line to every course syllabus saying, if you don't have enough food, here's how you go about getting it. And then, yes, you have to have the resources if you're going to ask the question. But not just making it a place that the student has to seek out the information, but maybe even raise the question for the student who may not even be thinking about how this is impacting their lives.
I think that's a good segue sort of into this question of, a lot of times it's clinicians in the health center or maybe academic advisors that are hearing about this issue of food insecurity with students. So how do you sort of sell the issue to the administration to kind of take action to help?
Well, for me, it really was about data. I appreciate what Tim just mentioned because, again, folks always go to a food pantry and GW's food pantry because they're the folks. We'll be opening our food pantry next month, and it's modeled a lot on the GW pantry. But we have a West Campus and we have other places where students are. And so folks are saying, so do we open a pantry here? It's like we can't have a pantry on every campus, a pantry off campus, and so we really need to work with partnering with students. But to that question, one of my concerns was the next step, because as I've been reading about the issue, I'm hearing that sometimes folks don't want to admit that they have food pantries on campus, and so the pantry isn't publicized like you'd want to, and so some folks students don't use it as much as they'd like to. And so one of the things that we're moving to is really doing some massive campaigning about the food pantry, just almost shameless about we're going to have this space in the lower level of one of the residence halls where students can get food. But with that, we're already getting some questions about, what about the law school? What about some of the other areas where we have students in the city? And so that's going to be the next step. But it's going to be critical for us that we partner with food banks and other organizations in the DC area to meet the needs of our students as well as others.
I think you make a really critical point about, we've talked about the stigmatization of students, but the stigmatization of schools. That schools don't want to admit that there's this problem because it makes them look bad. And so I think coming together underneath the umbrella of something like this and banding together and saying that this is an industry-wide issue that we're all working collaboratively on removes the fault of one school as failing their students.
And I would say that came up in every school we talked to. I mean, we've talked to Howard, American, every other school in this area. Everyone was worried about that negative backlash, and it never happened. I had the honor to be on NPR talking about this with Audie Cornish, and even in that environment where it was sort of prefaced with a, George Washington University that charges this much per student every year, by the time we got to the end of the interview, all of it was good. So the Washington Post has done several pieces on this. People have had a hard time trying to make the negative story happen. So schools that are worried about doing this because you might get negative backlash, it's still the right thing to do. So I'll take negative backlash if I'm doing what I need to do for my students. So I'll take that every single time, 10 times a week if I have to, because it's still the right thing to do. And I just haven't seen it either. I mean, I think the results have not ended up that way, and it's worth doing anyway. And I think we've seen with the schools here in the city how we've been able to come together. And the last thing I'll just mention is when we're talking about selling this idea to people, you got to figure out what they're willing to buy. So for me, I know that, for example, my current president, his daughter goes to the University of Miami in Ohio. If I want to do something, does Miami of Ohio do that? Yes or no, depending on the argument I want to make. When I was here, I looked at sort of what the connections were with leadership at this institution. What would they care about? It's a pretty competitive place. So if a school that we competed with did something we didn't, I made sure to mention that. You've got to know who you work for, who you work with, and what matters to them. Other people didn't care about competition. When they saw that there was a data point that said 22% of GW students didn't have enough to eat on a weekly basis, they were in because they cared about our students at that level. I had one conversation, I remember, with one person who I thought was going to be my biggest roadblock. I showed actual data from a survey that she trusted. What I thought was going to be an hour-and-a-half competition over this issue was a 7-minute conversation. And she said, great, let me know what I need to do. So you got to know what people are willing to buy, and that's how you sell it to them. So know your people, know what they need, and also I would say know what you control. The store here at GW partially happened because we controlled a building that just got built that had a room that we could just decide could be something else. You know, our sphere of control over that allowed us to create a room to do this in. If you don't have that kind of control, then who can you get on board that can give you that type of a thing?
Great. And I know we talked a little bit, campus food pantries might not be the best way to go, but for schools that are already sort of on that path, what tips do you have to set them up?
Have staff. Pantries can't be run by student volunteers. They can help. They can be a really important voice for spreading the word or helping make other students feel comfortable going there, but you have to have dedicated staff, particularly if you're working with your local food bank or another pantry or food rescue organizations. They really need that professional level and consistent person that's there that's going to help run it and make sure that that it stays off the ground. I have a bunch of other things to add, but that's the main one, is you have to have an actual person who's staffing the pantry.
I would say utilize the resources that are there. The College University Food Bank Alliance, they've got a great, don't print it, it's really big, just download it, manual on how to do this. If you can't answer all the questions in that about what you're going to do, then you're not ready. They've done this for a long time. They've done this way back since Michigan State had the first pantry on college campuses. They know what they're doing. Use that resource. So I think use the people around you. We created a very much watered-down process that we had 10 questions we asked people to ask themselves before they did this. First, started with what are your values? Know what you value and make sure that you hold that core. How are you going to manage this beyond year 1, year 2, year 3, the sustainability of this? It's important. The worst thing you can do is start this and not be able to keep going. So where's your money coming from? Where's your people coming from? Where's your food coming from? All questions that you have to answer before you open your doors. Too many people have the best of intentions and the worst of follow through. So I would always go back to College University Food Bank Alliance. We would not have the store here without it. I wouldn't have the conversation I'm having at JMU without it, and we wouldn't have been able to help other schools think about this without that resource.
And I guess speaking about resources, like how can students help, contribute to the programs?
Well, one of the things we're doing is we're working with our Student Government Association. And so, again, you have to have buy-in from students. And so one of the things that they're working on as they're trying to change how they finance clubs and organizations and doing some tweaking to their constitution, they want to do some type of earmark for the pantry, which would be wonderful if that can get through.
We've also heard of some college pantries being at least partially funded by a faculty giving option. Faculty see students every day and might feel a little bit helpless in being able to help those students sometimes with something like hunger, but they can definitely help financially support if there's a pantry on your campus. I think students also, as I mentioned, they can volunteer, right? They can make other students feel comfortable to go there, feel comfortable to seek out that help. And then I think students also can be on the lookout for signs of food insecurity among their peers. So I mentioned that, we treat college students being hungry as almost as if it's a rite of passage. Students are the best ones to see that happening among their peers and identify that, hey, that person always comes whenever we have free pizza. There might be something else going on.
And we've done a partnership here. They have done a partnership here. Sorry, it's weird to be back on campus and say they, where there is a student organization that does all the day-to-day work that is then supported by a set of staff, and we actually have an advisory board of mostly former staff, including myself, that support the group as well. So the students are really the front line. They do most of the work, but you still need an adult to drive the van. So things like that, and there is a backbone to this made up of staff here at the university, but also a lot of faculty and staff are donating through their own, I know I did it when I was here, through their paychecks back to this as well. But this, I would say Feeding America is one of the major partners for the store here, as well as partners and alumni who've donated to make it possible. So you really, the whole "it takes a village" is absolutely true with this. There's not a population that doesn't do something to help make the store possible on this campus, including our students.
I think you'll be most successful if you proactively think about what the student's role can be, rather than letting the student create an idea that may be difficult for the university to implement and not be institutionalized. One very, very passionate student 1 year is fantastic if you can harness that, but can create a lot of programs that there is no legacy to continue from. So if you can think about what that role would be, is it a food recovery network chapter that has a structure around it? Is it volunteer opportunities, rather than letting them create it? And also think through what the financial ramifications of these actions are in relation to your food services contract. Maybe a little self-serving as a food services contract company, but these things all cost money and need to be factored into the contractual negotiation at that time, and that's a conversation that you probably don't want the students involved in. So creating a safe place for them to contribute will make everybody happier.
And if I could, one of the things that Maisie said that I think is really important, especially with working with passionate students, if you've read the book, Getting to Yes, we need to get them past their position and get back down to the issue. Students will come forward and say, we must have a food pantry, and we'll demand a food pantry, but they actually don't know what the issue is. We have to drill down that from there a little bit and get back down to, okay, what is the issue we're trying to resolve, and then let's come up with a solution. Get our students back from the solution and get them back to the issue and work together on it. Because oftentimes you may end up opening a food pantry that you can't manage. Or they will, because they're just excited about this issue. So you got to figure out a way to harness that passion back to the issue at hand versus their decided solution based on not a lot of knowledge normally.
Which is also a great educational benefit, right? If the purpose of our institutions is to teach students all they need to know to be able to go through an actual needs assessment, plan creation, thinking through the institutionalization is a fantastic learning opportunity that would probably carry them through their careers in many great ways.
And that's sort of what I was getting at with the having need to have dedicated staff, is you can have a really passionate student who's on campus and they're really excited, or they want to do it as a capstone project or something, but then who's going to actually order the food the next year? Who's going to stock the shelves, who's going to manage the volunteers. And again, I just want to make the pitch too that, again, you don't have to create this from scratch. There are food banks and pantries across the country that likely already serve your students without you even knowing it. So find out who's nearby that's already doing the work, and find out if there's a way that you can just supplement them, or that they can serve your students better.
And having that diversity of support is essential. I mean, I left, and the other person who was part of creating the store left within 2 months of each other this summer from this institution, and yet the store is as strong as ever. And that's because of the student buy-in, because of other staff that are willing to support it. So we really do have to have a breadth of support across this, because I'm not going to overstate my own importance, but at campuses, when you have staff leave, sometimes the things that they do disappear with them. But having the right people around that are still bought into this topic when people leave is important.
And as a vice president, and as we're sort of embarking on this, that's my critical concern, is how do we make sure that this is sustainable moving forward. I think the other thing that's been helpful for us is we had all of these pockets of these small pantries that were working on campus. And so part of the politics for us too is sort of getting some of those folks to let go so that we can sort of build a coalition and have one space where we do that work.
I think a lot of times too, it's students that are living on campus who are sort of recognized as the ones that are going hungry, because it's, the dining halls may be closed, what do they do? But how do you have these programs for off-campus students as well, who it may not be as a parent?
I mean, I'll go. I think having worked here before, our off-campus students were able to get to campus and still get to the resource. At GW, almost 15,000 students live off campus. If we do a pantry, if is the key term, there'll probably still just be one, and they would need to come to campus to do it. Our students come to campus every day for class. So I honestly don't worry too much. That's a more rural location. This is a more of a city location. I think both groups can get there. I would tell you, based on the data collected for 2 years when I was here, very much equal numbers on and off campus students using it. A higher number, about a third of the students were grad students, and the larger proportion of those grad students were international grad students using it, all of which lived off campus. So when we looked at the numbers, on and off campus students were getting to it. It's in the building just next door to this. very much central to campus. It's just around the corner from the Chick-fil-A, so it's a very busy location. We actually put it there on purpose so you wouldn't sort of be noticed that you were going to the food pantry, so we could avoid that stigma. But that reality is on or off campus all came in very, very high numbers.
And that's where I think the helping students connect with something like SNAP can be helpful, even if they can't use their SNAP benefits on your campus or in the dining hall or whatever. A lot of students live off campus and still buy groceries at grocery stores or other retailers. So that one intervention can be really powerful in just helping them get that extra little bit of money every month to buy food wherever it is that they live.
And we always work hard currently just to make sure we have a resource sheet where students can find that stuff. But we just found, just again through a survey, that more and more students would like to have those services provided on campus. And so I think a lot of our off-campus students are cycling through. Our challenge is going to be how do we keep the pantry open and make those resources available later as opposed to just 9 to 5.
And because we are in Washington, D.C., how can campuses sort of work with lawmakers and policymakers to address this issue so that they understand sort of the importance it is to colleges and universities?
I'll start. Hunger's been bipartisan for a long time, a bipartisan issue with support from both sides. It's really only been in recent years that we've sort of seen that shift a little bit, although that's less around the issue and more around the specific programs that, government programs that address the issue like SNAP. I think colleges are in a really unique position to actually help bring lawmakers back together on an issue like hunger, because college students are one group that everybody sort of wants to see succeed, and they're one group that the nation sort of depends on them succeeding for everybody to succeed. So some of those tired stereotypes about being lazy or getting a job or whatever, none of those apply to college students, right? We all know that they're trying to better themselves and become better citizens. And the fact that they're still struggling with hunger, I think gives college students, college administrators, whoever's connected to a university community, the chance to sort of break through some of those talking points that we often hear around an issue like SNAP. So that's my first thing. And then the second thing is it's Farm Bill time. The Farm Bill just expired last, I guess, 2 weeks ago, September 30th. Congress did not pass it. We're all sort of in a waiting game now to see what's going to happen with the elections coming up and when and if they decide to pick that bill up again. But that's the major nutrition piece of legislation in the country. It authorizes SNAP, it authorizes TFAP, which is how food banks get a good portion of the food that comes through our doors. So just advocating, that those programs are important and that they serve students that you serve, whether it's a private citizen or in your official capacity, I think also can go a long way.
I would just add briefly, Sarah Golder-Crabb would be mad if I didn't mention, lunch programs, breakfast programs exist K through 12. Can they not exist 13 through 16 or through 18, 19, depending on how you want to count the years? Those make a difference in a lot of communities, and they could make a difference here as well on college campuses. And to me, everyone wants to sort of blame the cost of college. This is happening on every college campus, no matter the cost of attendance of that college. So this is a universal challenge that we're all facing. And then I know for us, having worked very well with Feeding America, continue to look at IRS rules that sort of limit some abilities for pantries to work with Feeding America. We were able to work that out. Not everyone has been that successful. But I think we're all tied down by some of these policies that limit our ability to help. And whatever we can do to sort of step in and do that and think about if it's happening at one level of education, it probably could still be helpful the next level.
Does anybody in the audience have any questions, or do we have any online?
Thank you. We do have an online question. One of them is around, again, a very similar theme we've heard before about off-campus. So how do you manage the difference between offering and accessible food solutions to off-campus students versus on-campus residential students?
The one thing I would add to what I shared before is one of the things that the store did, and again, making this sort of a commitment about faith, trust, and respect, which are the 3 core values that were very much why the store existed. The store is open from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. every day. It is not monitored at any time. on purpose. The student gets access on their card. They can just swipe, and all they have to do is give us their email and their ID number, and we provide them that access. And we did that for lots of reasons. One, we felt like if just looking at a buffet that's being set up over here, if a normal college student goes to an event and can go through a buffet line, and I don't ask them why they're taking as much as they're taking, why would I do that to a student in need? So why am I monitoring that student who's coming in, who's in need, and saying you can only take this can or this box or that box? I'm going to trust them. I'm going to have faith in them. I'm going to respect them as individuals. The reason why I mentioned that for the off-campus piece is that allows our students, no matter what, how many jobs, how many classes, how many whatever, they can come early in the morning at 6 a.m., they can come 2 a.m. We would have been open 24 hours, but the building's not open 24 hours. The building's open 20 hours a day, so the store is open 20 hours a day. That was really the goal, was to provide that level of access so a student, no matter where they were coming from, no matter how many hours they were working, class, whatever, could access it at some point. So for us, we can't really do multiple locations. We got asked to do a location on our Mount Vernon campus, which is a short bus ride away from here. It didn't make sense to try and run 2 pantries. It's just not possible. And then when we asked another question on the optional section of the forum, a lot of Mount Vernon students were coming to this food pantry and getting food. So it's not like they were missing out because they had to ride a bus with their food. So I also think, there are ways to work around it versus creating multiple locations that we just weren't in a position to do. We couldn't maintain.
I'd like to just give a quick kind of Food Bank 101 as well to help you understand how to connect with our resources. So if you go, if you know your local food bank, you can go straight to their website. If you don't know who your local food bank is, you can go to feedingamerica.org and click Find a Food Bank. We cover the whole nation. Every county, every community, every congressional district has a food bank that serves it. So type in your zip code or your state or town, whatever. The food bank that serves that area will come up. From there, you'll go through a similar process to find out who their community partners are. So as I mentioned, pantries, soup kitchens, schools, boys and girls clubs, other nonprofits. So from there, you'll go through the same thing. Type in your zip code and you can see exactly which resources are nearby. Usually there's phone numbers and hours and what days of the week they're open and all of that too. So if students off campus do need that supplemental food assistance that they're not able to get on campus or through SNAP or through any other resource, they also can access a charitable pantry.
And I'll just do a commercial. None of us survive without Feeding America with this work. So they have been a godsend for us in figuring this out, and we could not have done it without them and the Capital Area Food Bank.
Another question that came in was asking regarding what kinds of tips do you have in approaching local or corporations or businesses for supporting food bank activities?
Well, everybody loves food banks, so it's not that much harder. It's not that difficult of a pitch. Most people understand the need in their community. Most people have some connection with their local food bank, whether it's through volunteering or donating to a food drive or something like that. So usually making the case is not that tough. And then it's just asking for whatever support it is that you need, whether it's financial support or you need volunteers or you need food rescue or you want to work with an industry partner to have them help you figure out the logistics of running a food pantry. There's all kinds of ways that organizations and community partners can help that don't necessarily have to be a huge lift.
And I've, I guess, thrown off a few of my colleagues in this world with this concept, but don't accept what you don't want or what you don't need. I will often tell those local folks, if you want to volunteer, here are the times that we need volunteers, and this is the only times we need volunteers, but what we really need is your money. And we're happy to tell the world that you did this and all that, but I've never run food drives on college campuses. I don't want to run them. College students don't give away good food in food drives, typically. And I've never bought into and will never buy into the concept of beggars can't be choosers. These are not beggars. These are our students. We should care about them at a higher level than giving them whatever bad food we get from other college students because their mom thought they'd eat lima beans. So I ask for what I need. And if a group's not willing to do that for us, then I'm not going to partner with that group. We've had great partnerships. Panera has been an amazing partner for us, and they've been able to give us amazing amounts of food at the end of every night through another local partner that we really worked with well. That has been an amazing thing for us, but at some point we actually were getting too much, so we worked with them to sort of distribute that through the other local partners. So I just think ask for what you need and be okay when you say no if what someone wants to give you isn't actually helpful to you.
I would also just add to that in a sort of simple way, as we've been publicizing our wanting to move forward with our food bank, we have a donor that's saying if you can get it up and you can get it running and it's sustainable for a year, I'll cut you a $25,000 check. And so for me, it's just making sure that people know where you're going. And as Tim pointed out, we're just trying to be as deliberate as we can. So now I'm understanding where Dr. Turner is getting her tenacity from, because she's been working with GW in terms of helping to set up our food bank.
And as I mentioned, we have this white paper that we wrote, and we also have an internal guide on setting up pantries for our own employees. I would love to think that all of our staff has read both of those documents, but the odds on that are pretty low. So I think when you approach a company, understanding that that person may be new to this issue and they may not know what they can do, what they're allowed to do, and what would be helpful. So approaching with specific asks is helpful, but those as truly asks, not as demands, and giving them some time to figure out through their corporate structure what they can and can't do, and really helping guide them through the process, because most likely your dining services manager is not an expert on food insecurity. It will be new to them as well, and let's all learn together.
Another question online is around university partnerships. How do universities that are within proximity to each other work together to help solve these problems?
I would share our student government made an effort, I guess a year ago, to work with campus libraries. And one of the things to remember is if a student is having a hard time eating, they probably are having a hard time with books, they're probably having a hard time with dress clothes, they're probably having a hard time with toiletries, they're probably having a hard time with lots of other things. And my way of thinking about it is, how many of these barriers can I help with? So one of the things the student government did last year was they got the campus library to buy a number of copies of the most used books on campus in classes. And they put them in the reserve area, so students could come in and reserve those books. They couldn't take them out of the library, but they could reserve them up to 2 hours at a time. So for a class that normally has about 100 students in it, they might have had 5 copies of that book. So students could come in, borrow the book for 2 hours, do the reading for the next day's class, and go away. And what they did was largest number of classes, largest number of students in classes, most expensive books, and a couple other things to pick the books. That made a huge impact for a lot of the students that had said, I would never have bought this book. That student now did well, I assume. I don't have real data. I assume that student did better in that class than they would have without a book. So those types of partnerships are things we all have to look for. You know, when you think about how we close, a lot of schools close during holidays. You know, it's great that there's a fall break here at GW, but they're open still. So students don't have to go anywhere for 4 days. When you think about your spring breaks and your winter breaks, if students can't afford food, they probably can't afford a flight. They probably can't afford other things to get themselves someplace else. So what are we doing to help students with all aspects? One of my only concerns about the food, sort of the passion around this issue right now, is that we're forgetting that there's other stuff. Last year we did a school supply drive, last 2 years actually, they, this year, did a school supply drive. So a lot of faculty and staff, when they were buying school supplies for the kids, just threw an extra 4 notebooks and pens and pencils and things into their basket at the Target or the Walmart, and then came and donated them. And then every year, they also do a nicer clothes sort of a drive, so suits and things like that, and that stuff goes off the shelves in minutes because students have to interview. They need to get the job, and one of the things that's hard is students that are in this struggle need to get to the next level, and sometimes not having a jacket can be that blazer can be the difference of getting out of sort of this and breaking this sort of path or not. So having people give away clothes that are still in really great shape have really made a difference for a lot of students as well.
Yeah. Partnering on getting students other supplies. When I was at one institution, we worked with a local organization that it was more of one of those dress for success type of programs. And at the time, our associate dean, she did a lot of work with Pantries and other community sort of work. And one of the things she always said was sometimes you have to back into an issue. And so when Tim was talking, if I can alleviate some other costs, that leaves money for food and other things. And so, as student affairs administrators, it's just critically important that we, just constantly be in touch with what students' needs are and doing whatever we can to help them be successful. And sometimes, it could be simple things, like, for example, in our pantry, we're also trying to get donations for toiletries and that kind of stuff, so it'll be far more than just food.
And the students from the store this past year did a presentation to a bunch of alumni for an innovation grant concept and got, I don't even remember the number, a large amount of money to do a laptop loaner program and a clicker loaner program. So again, the clicker feels like it's a big deal, but it can be $80. And I don't remember the research, but a few years ago there was research that said often the last thing that makes a student step out from an education is usually a charge that's less than $100. So it can be the final straw, it can be less than $100 impact for a student. So if you can remove those things like that, like a student whose laptop breaks, that's it. They don't have the money to get that laptop fixed, and you can't survive as we've gotten rid of computer labs on college campuses. There's so few options like that anymore. So they went to the alumni bought into it and gave them a significant amount of money to buy a group of laptops and clickers that they'll rent every year back to students. And those will last, the clickers will last forever and the laptops will last 3 or 4 years. Think of, I think they're going to buy 20 or 30 laptops. 90 students over the course of those years will be positively impacted by that.
All right, Edith, that's it for the questions online.
Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists for joining us this morning. I think, there's a lot of good insight that you gave us that we can bring back to our campuses, because I know a lot of us are struggling with these issues. So right now, I guess lunch is being served, and then at 12:30, the keynote speaker will be in this room, Erin McDonald, the Vice President at the Center for Applied Research and Action at Feeding America. Thank you. Thank you for coming.